Hey guys, welcome back to class. I'm so excited that more people came to last meeting, so hopefully more will show up throughout this meeting too. And I hope that throughout the week that you guys practiced a little bit with div IDs. I know some people didn't come last meeting that were talking about in the chat like what they should be updated on. I think if those people who didn't come to the last meeting just watch the YouTube video, you guys should be updated on everything. We just went over one small topic. So yeah. And we won't really be going more into that today, so you're not going to be missing out on any information that you should have known for today's lesson. So you should be able to understand everything today without prior knowledge from last meeting if you were here for the first meeting. So today we're going to be going over, as an overview, we're going to be going over how functions work, decision statements, for loops, while loops, and then we're going to be starting our final project for this session, for this course, because that's going to be taking like a couple of meetings at least, and you guys will also be needing to work on the project like throughout the weeks, like during the time between each session too. So I think if we just kind of get started with like how you guys should like begin with that project, that'd be great, so that you guys could like work on that whenever you have free time, or just like whenever you guys can find time for that. So yeah, so the first thing we are going to be going over today is how functions work. So before you guys can see my screen, right, with the notes. I'll share this with you guys too. Let me know in the chat if you guys can see this.
Can someone confirm whether you're able to access that link?
Yeah, I think they can. I can see them on the slideshow. All right. So, before we even go into like how functions work, so what are functions, right? So functions are pretty much like, if we think about it in like CS terms and not even like this like example I have in the second slide, if we think about it like in how like just like websites in general use it, like if there was like a website that's like where you can order like pizzas, for example, and you're like building your pizza, right? You're like, okay, so this is the kind of sauce I want, this is the kind of like base, or all those like different like variables in a sense, right? Like those are all the different like things that you're doing to like make your pizza like unique to you, or like how you want it, right? So those can be called as like variables or attributes, and there's going to be a function that puts everything together. So that's what the function is essentially. Like in really simple terms, that's what the function does. Functions pretty much just do one task that you want it to do. So if you want like if the person that's selling the pizza, or like is the one in charge of the website where you're ordering the pizza, they want to get like all like they want to get like what you ordered, so what you put into the website, they want to get those values that you want, like this kind of sauce and these toppings or whatever, right? So the function is gonna go into all those variables and attributes and be like, okay, so if they want this kind of topping, it's gonna cost this much. If they want this kind of size of pizza, that it's gonna cost this much. So it's pretty much just getting all the user data and then using that towards some kind of output or some kind of end goal. And this is just one example. Functions are used in so many different ways, and they're pretty much like the essential like thing that you guys will really need to like understand for our final project. So functions, pretty much what they do is they're pretty much doing abstraction, right? So they're suppressing excess detail and complexity to better focus on a relevant concept. So here's an example. So if your parents say clean your room, this is an abstraction that involves so many different things, like picking up your clothes, folding laundry, or like just so many different things in general, right? So putting all of this together is pretty much what an abstraction is. And abstractions are encompassed into functions. So that's why we're going over what abstractions are. So yeah, does anyone have any questions on like this first example or like what functions could be used for? Because I know I just like went over so many things in like 1 minute, and I just realized that that was kind of fast. So, does anyone have any questions on that? Just type in the chat. I'll be continuing right now, but we can go over them at any time if I see any questions come up in the chat. All right, so pretty much what an abstraction is just taking a bunch of little like details and little like tasks to be like completed for an end goal or like for one like specific task. In this instance, it's cleaning a room. This takes a bunch of little like things like cleaning, like picking up the clothes, cleaning dirty laundry, and all that, right? So all that can be encompassed into cleaning a room. And that's what an abstraction is. It's like suppressing all the little details into one term, which is cleaning the room. So this code is doing an abstraction right now. It's like abstracting a procedure, right? So we're going to be using this robot example throughout today. So pretty much what we want to do with this robot is when we click play, we want this robot to like do all these like go through this whole like obstacle, not even obstacle, but like go through this course. And then we wanted to go to this end goal, which is the gray cube, right, or like box right here, right? So that's the end goal of this. So right here we're having an abstraction of, so first of all we're doing a while loop, right? And we're going to be going through like specific examples of like while loops and if statements and all this that we're covering right now, but don't really focus on this function right here, but like don't really focus on like the while loop and the if statement and else statements on all that in the function right now. Just look at the fact that it's called function spiral left, right? So what it's doing is it's checking if this robot can move left or it can move forward. So it can't move left, right? Because it can only go forward right now. There's no left or right. There's only black in the left or right portion of this course. So the only thing that it can do is it can go forward, because these two lines right here, they're called or statements. So this course is going to execute if either of these statements are true. So if it can move left or it can move forward, this is going to execute these statements below this while loop, right? So it can't move left, but it can go forward. So now we're going to go forward one, and now we're going to do an if statement. So in the if statement, if the robot can move left, we want to rotate the robot left and then move forward. Otherwise, we want to just keep going forward. Now, when this, pretend that this robot is like one cube forward right now, or like one box forward. But if the robot was here right now, it can't rotate left or right, right? Because in this if statement, it's saying if it can move left, do all this. But it can't. It can only go forward because there's no boxes to go left, right? So now we're going to go to this else, and it's just going to go forward. So now it's right here. It's in the third box. And now it can still keep going forward, but it can't go left. So now we're going to be going through this whole function a bunch of times. So I'm not going to be going through like each single move like for this whole like course, but I think you guys can understand like that's what a function does. The function is pretty much taking like all the little steps that it has to do and just putting it into like one general like scheme that we can like say, okay, so this robot has to go through the function called spiral left, because we can't say, okay, now it has to move left, now it has to go forward, now it has to do this and do that, because that just takes so many steps. And the whole point of coding is to make everything more simpler and more efficient so that the computer can run faster, right? So does anyone have any questions on this example, or should we move forward? All right, so all right, so Next, defining a function and calling a function. So earlier, we just went through a function called spiral left, and pretty much we defined the function. We're teaching the computer the steps of the procedure. That's what we're doing with the while loop, the if statement, and the else statement. So we're going through all of these so that we can like teach the computer that this is the purpose of the function called spiral left, and this is what we want that function to do so that the robot can reach the end goal of the gray box, right? And then in another function, if we call the function called spiral left, then it's going to go through all these steps, but in this function. And that's the procedure that we call calling a function. So here we define the function called spiral left, and in this other function called robot instructions, we're calling a function, um, we're calling the function spiral left. So there could be like so many different purposes for calling a function, because like for example, the pizza example from earlier, right? So if we want to calculate the final price, like the person like that like created the website or whatever, right? When they're coding for to like make the website, and they're like, okay, so now that I got all like what the person ordered and everything, now I need to calculate the final price. So they could have multiple like functions where they get, okay, so if they choose um this kind of topping or like this kind of like base for the pizza, it's gonna be like this is gonna be like the price, right? And they're gonna add it all up in one function, like get the total price, and then in a separate function they could be displaying it on the website, right? Or like they could be sending like or emailing a receipt to the person who is ordering the pizza, because putting all of that into one function, it could give us so many different errors and also like just makes everything so much more complicated. So that's why that's the purpose of making a bunch of different functions and then calling them all in one function to like get like put everything together pretty much. And then finally, with functions, there's parameters, right? So over here in, okay, so we didn't really go over the function called multi-move or anything like that. These are just random functions that you can just come up with, like, so don't really focus on like what this function's for or anything, but look at the fact that over here, anything in the parentheses, it's called a parameter. And here we're having a parameter called number. So number, we're just instantiating here as like a variable that we're going to be using throughout this function, right? And then later on, when we call this function, we want to give this parameter an actual value. So the actual value, it's going to be called an argument, where in this case, the variable number is called a parameter. So the actual value or the argument over here, we're saying it's going to be multi-move 6. So like when we're actually calling the function, we want to actually give a value to the parameter. But when we're just like making the function, we need to like say that, okay, so we're going to be taking in this value to be using throughout our function. So when we're actually calling the function, we can get the value. Or also like here, we're naming it as 6, right? The value. So that's the value that we're going to be using to code like throughout this function. But yeah, I think that was a little bit going into the other topics that we're going to be talking about today. So it might seem like really complicated, which is why I wasn't sure how to like exactly explain some topics if we didn't learn like the prior steps to this. So that's why I'm going to be going over the while loops and the if else statements that we went through today, and then we're going to be coming back to the slideshow and see if we can understand this a little bit better. So yeah, but we all also just finished with the slideshow anyways. And also, for the code, this is it's in the slideshow itself. We didn't go over any other code. So yeah, for the person in the chat asking, oh, would you put this code in the body? Okay, never mind. I didn't understand the question at first. I thought you were asking to put it in the chat. So this code would go in the script, because remember the body of the coding platform, or in VS Code, like in HTML, when we're coding, the body is for what we want to show up on the website, and then the script is for the functionality. So over here we're working on the functionality, because this is like how we want the like what we want the robot to function as, or how we want the robot to function, right? So this is like all this code that we're going over right now. This is all the functionality. This is all the functionality. So this would all be in the script tags of our HTML web page. And then for the in the body tags, though, in those body tags, we would have the headers, paragraph tags, buttons, or text views, like anything that we want to actually show up on the website. And this is all like, this would all be considered as like backend work, because this is just like the functionality of the website. And then what you're referring to for like the code in the body, that's front end, what you can actually see on the website. So yeah, that's pretty much abstraction, guys. And the only thing I really want you guys to understand from this, because I know the other steps could be a little bit complicated, since this is our first time like really going into like the different like aspects of like our project. I just want you guys to understand that abstraction is pretty much just taking a bunch of little details and putting it into one function to focus on one particular task at the moment. So just like, that's pretty much what the first slide is saying too. So that's like the really main point that I want you guys to understand right now. And all this rest of the rest of the slides, you guys will slowly understand as we start doing our restaurant project. So yeah. And you guys aren't supposed to be putting this into VS Code right now. I'm just going over like some examples. So yeah. But I will be going over some VS Code examples today, which you guys could be coding as notes. However, I can't share that code because it won't work for you guys, since you need some other like downloaded stuff for it. So yeah. But now we're going to be going into other stuff that we just talked about in the first slideshow, but more specifically, we're going to be going over decision statements. And before we do this, I want to show you guys an example of what decision statements look like. So over here, we're trying to get this robot, or like this triangle, blue triangle, to this gray box right here, right? When we click play. So as you guys can see, it made it all the way to the gray box, and this was due to decision statements. And that's the first topic that we're going to be covering now after abstraction. So we're going to be going over what decision statements are, and then I'll come back to this. And if someone could like explain like what's going on and like why it made it to the gray box, that would be great. Okay, so let me share this real quick. All right, I just put that in the chat. Let me know if you guys can access it, and then we can start with the slideshow. All right, so I see that you guys can access it. So we'll be moving on now. So decision statements just specify one or more conditions to be evaluated or tested by a program, right? And this might seem like gibberish right now. So pretty much what it's saying is, if decision statements are pretty much saying, okay, so this is a decision to be made. If this is true or if this is false, we're going to be doing this code to go ahead with it, right? So in this diagram right here, it's saying, so this is the condition. If this is true, this is going to be the code that like follows. Otherwise, if it's false, it's just going to go straight to this endpoint. So that's pretty much what decisions are. It's like when we make decisions to do something, like, am I going to study right now, or am I going to, I don't know, like take a walk or something. Like there's different results for different decisions that we make, right? So that's pretty much what decision statements are. So if this decision or condition is true, this code is going to follow. Otherwise, this different type of code is going to follow, and they're both going to give different results. Or yeah, if they're gonna both give like different results, or they're gonna vary a bit, because that's the purpose of having decision statements. So there's different types of decision statements. So the first one that we're going to be covering is Booleans. So Booleans only have two possible values, true or false. So back to the pizza example, I feel like that's really working out for us today with the material we have. So I'll just be kind of sticking on to that. So back to the pizza example. So if you were the user if you were the user of the website where you're trying to order a pizza and they ask, do you want cheese, yes or no? And you choose yes, you're pretty much doing the Boolean right there, right? So in the back end, in the code of the website, it could be saying something like, if the user chooses true for choose if the user chooses true for cheese, then we're going to go ahead with this kind of code. Otherwise, if they choose false, we're going to go ahead with this kind of code. Right? So that's pretty much what Booleans are. And they can be thought of and or represented by two opposite values. So once again, those are the opposite values, right? Saying yes to cheese or no to the cheese. And this can also be like an example. It's like a light bulb. So if it's on or off, that's a Boolean, right? So if it's on, that's the opposite of being off. So that's a Boolean value right there. Does anyone have any questions on Booleans before we go into if statements real quick? All right, so if statements are pretty much just another kind of decision statements, right? So in this case, we're saying if this decision is true, then do this kind of code. While in the other case of Booleans, we're saying if this is we're not even saying if this case, we're just saying that this is either the case or either this is the case. But in if statements, we're specifying what this case could be. So over here in this example, we're initializing a variable called number to the number 2. And in this if statement, we're saying if this number is greater than 2, this is the code that's going to follow. So if it's true, it's going to execute the code in the curly braces right here. And otherwise, it's just going to go to the code right after the if. But in both cases, it's going to go to the code after. It just depends on if the number is greater than 0, that it's going to go through the code in the if statement itself. So now over here, it's saying that the number is -2, right? That's not greater than 0. So now it's just going to skip through the if statement and go right to the code after the if statement. And if statements are really useful, and like especially we're going to be using them a lot in our website that we're going to be working on, which I introduced in our last session, but I'll be going over more specifically at the end of today's meeting too. So we're going to be using these a lot. So if you guys have any questions on this, let me know in the chat like right now so we can clear those really fast. Because next we're going to be going over if else statements, and this is just kind of building up on the concept of if statements. So does anyone have any questions on this like whatsoever? Or if you guys are taking any notes on this, I can wait like for a few minutes before we move on. Okay, so let's go ahead with what if else statements are. So earlier when we were talking about if statements, if statements are pretty much just one kind of, it's just going through one decision. But if else statements are checking if this statement isn't true. So it's going through, okay, so if the number is greater than 0, so the number 2, it's going to be going to the else code now instead of just going to the code right after the if. So we're just adding on more decision statements pretty much. Because earlier, when we were talking about just the if statement, so if the number is greater than 0, so number 2 is greater than 0, it's either just going to go through this code, or if it's not greater than 0, it's just going to go to the code right after. But for if else statements, it's going to be going to the code right in the else statement. So if the number is greater than 2, we're going to, for example, we're going to have code to add the number 2 to another variable. Otherwise, if it's not greater than 2, not greater than 0, we're going to subtract the number 2 from some kind of variable, for example. That could be, for an example, code in the else statement. So think of it as like one or the other in some sense, right? And it's impossible to run both at the same time, or like even at different times. It's impossible to run both of the statements. It's either the if statement occurs or the else statement occurs. Kind of like the Booleans, but here we have conditions that they have to be true to go through any of them. And now building on that even more, we have else if statements. So else if statements are pretty much that, like, we can go through these and we can have even more conditions now. So in if statements, we only had one condition, and that was the if statement condition, right? And then in if else statements, we had an if statement condition and an else statement condition. And now in else if statements, we have the if statement condition, we have an else if statement condition, and this could go on for so many more like conditions, you guys. So there could be more else ifs right after, but in the instance of if else statements, there's just if and there's else. That's it. You can't have more else after if, because if you're saying, okay, so if I want to eat cookies right now, I'm going to eat them. Otherwise, I'm going to do this. There's not going to be another otherwise, you know? So it's just like there's either an if statement that occurs or there's the else statement that occurs. But in else if statements, there's so many different like conditions that could occur. So first it's going to check. So if this condition is true, it's going to go through this. Otherwise, if this isn't true, let's go to the next statement. Okay, so is this condition true? If it is, or if it's not, it's going to go to the next one. But if it is true, it's going to go through this. So now if in the case it wasn't true, it's going to go to this next condition and it's going to check, okay, so is this true or is this not? And then it might go through this code or it might go to the next else if statement. So that's pretty much what else if statements are. So yeah, it's just a way to separate testing conditions together, or it's also a way to link 2 or more testing conditions together. And only one of the conditions that connected conditions can be ran. So pretty much what that's saying is only one of these statements can actually like go through with the code. So it can't go through all the code in each one of these statements. It can only go through one of them. It's either this else if statement with the condition 2, or this else if statement with condition 3, or the first if statement with condition 1. It can't go through all the code in each one of these. It can only go through one condition, because it can only fulfill one condition's all the attributes for one else if statement. Does anyone have any questions so far? You guys can just turn on your mic, or also just let me know in the meeting chat. All right, so to recap, if, else if, and else statements, they can all be encompassed into one concept too. So here we're using if statement, an else if statement, and an else statement, right? So if you guys notice, there's like a huge difference between the if statements, between the if and else if statements compared to the else statement. Does anyone understand what it is right now? You guys can see it on here right now. It's pretty much just that if and else if statements, there's conditions for them to be true, but for else, it's just like if these aren't true, it's just going to go straight to else. So if these aren't true, there's only one case that could happen, right? So that's why we don't have in parentheses like we do for else if and if statements any kind of code here. We're just doing else this. So if we go through this code right now with the number 2, so if the number 2 is greater than 0, we're going to go through this code. So here it's just going straight to this code. But if the number is 0, we're going to go through this first if statement. Is the number 0 greater than 0? No, it's not. So now let's go to the else if statement. If the number is equal to 0, by the way, to check if a variable or value is equal to another variable or value, we want to do 2 double equals. So when we're doing 1 equals, we're instantiating a variable. So we're making the variable number equal to 0. But here we're checking if the variable number is equal to 0. So here we're making the variable number be 0. So here this variable is actually 0. And we're saying, is this 0 the same as 0? Or is this variable the same as 0? So that's the purpose of using 2 equals symbols. So here we have the number 0, right? And it is equal to 0. So now this code is going to be taking place. Now, for this next condition, it's saying let this variable called number actually be -2. So first, we're going to instantiate the variable number to -2. And now let's go through all these statements again. So if this number, or -2, it's greater than 0, we're going to go through this code, but it's not. -2 is less than 0. So now let's go to the next statement. This else if statement is saying, is -2 equal to 0? It's not. So now let's go to the next statement. Now in this next statement, there's no conditions that we have to go through for this to like occur. It's just else, right? So now this code is just going to be taking place, and that's going to be the end result. And here is some VS Code examples to go along with this. So earlier I showed you guys that example with the robot maze simulator, right? So now we're going to be seeing the code behind that. And you guys don't have to have this in your VS Code because it's not going to work since you need some other things downloaded for it that we won't be getting into right now. So just look at how it works, and I think it might also help you guys focus a little bit better and just understand the material instead of trying to like rush to get everything downloaded and into your VS Code, because you guys can always come back to the slideshows or the video to refresh on any topics. Okay, so we just went over decision statements, right? So decision statements encompass if statements, else if statements, and else statements, as well as booleans. And we're going through a decision statement to get this robot all the way to this gray box. So here's the code for that to like actually work. So first we're checking, actually no, so first we're telling the robot move forward twice. So these are functions. So this function called move forward, it's saying, it's pretty much telling the robot to go forward one time. So here we're saying, okay, so move forward twice. So now it's gonna go 1, 2. So now it's gonna pause right here, right? And now we're saying if the number 6 is smaller than 5, rotate right. is it smaller than 5? It's not. 6 is greater than 5. So it's not going to rotate right, and instead it's going to go else if 4 is greater than 5, it's not. 4 is smaller than 5. So now we're going to go with this else statement, and now it's saying if both of these statements aren't true, otherwise go to this else statement and move forward one more time. So now we move forward twice here, right? So we're at 1, 2, and now we're saying move forward again in the else statement. So now we're going to go forward one more time. So right now we're in this box right here. So what does it say after this? It's saying move forward 2 more times. So we're right here, and now we're going to move forward 2 more times. So 1, 2, and right now we're here at this intersection to go into the gray box or go right here. So now let's go to the next if statement, right? So it's saying, is 3 greater than or equal to 10? Is it? It's not, right? So since it's not, instead of rotating right, we're going to go to the next statement, which is the else if statement. And it's saying, is 48 less than or equal to 47? Since that's false, we're going to be going to the next part of the code, which is saying rotate left and then rotate forward twice. So since it says rotate left, when we're right over here at this intersection, we're going to first rotate left. So we didn't move anywhere. All we did was rotate left. And then it's saying move forward twice. So now we're here. And another time going forward is right here. So now we're at this white box right here, right? And now to go to the next if statement, it's saying is 10 equal to 100? Since it's not, we're just going to not move forward, and we're going to move on to the next else if statement. And it's saying is 8247 equal to 8247? Since that's true, we're going to be rotating right. So since we were right here, now we're going to be rotating right because this else if statement that we just went through testified as testified as true. So now we're going to be rotating right because of the function rotate right. And now, since we went through the else if statement, we're going to skip this else statement and we're going to go straight to moving forward twice. And now that we rotated right and we moved forward twice, we make it into the gray box, which is why when we click play, it goes through all this code, and that's how it successfully makes it into the gray box. Now, I just want to go over once again why we wouldn't go through this else statement. So first is if 10 is equal to 100, go through this. It's not. Otherwise, if 8,247 is equal to 8,247, rotate right. Okay, so it is equal to that number. So now we're going to rotate right. We did. And then it's saying otherwise. But we already went through this, right? So that's why we wouldn't go through this, because we can only go through one of these statements. So it's saying if this, then go through this. Otherwise, if this, then go through this. But if this was in the case that this was false, then this would be like, okay, otherwise, if both of those weren't true, then just go through this. But since this was true, we're going to be skipping over this else statement and then going straight to the code right after. So that's how the decision statements work for that one, guys. Does anyone have any questions on that? That was like a really new topic that we didn't cover at all yet. So if anyone has any questions, let me know right now. Or if you don't, you can also just say you don't have any questions in the meeting chat. Okay, so I know someone asked a question about how you write robot instructions in the code. So pretty much what we're doing here is we're making a function called robot instructions, and we're giving it a set of tasks to fulfill or go through, right? So we're saying, okay, move forward, and then go through all these if-else statements to finally get to the gray box. And then here we're ending the function. And then over here, later on, we're calling the function called robot instructions and saying, go through this when we click the button called play. And this was why I didn't give you guys the code for this, because I thought it just confused you guys more, because there's like a bunch of other like things that you have to download for this, like this one, like test rotation, like stuff that goes along with this, which is why I didn't really go into the specifics. So I know that might have just complicated like the answer for like the person that just asked that question in the chat, but like yeah, pretty much what we're doing is just making a function called robot instructions, and in that we're giving the um robot a set of tasks to go through and fulfill. And then after that, and after we code that, we're just saying that when we click the button play, we want it to go through this function. Was that the question that was that like the solution you guys were looking for, or was it something else? More specific than that? Let me know. Okay. So now that we're done with decision statements, we'll be going over for loops next. So first, let me just share the slideshow. Wait. Okay, so the you win sign pops up because there's an if statement that's saying, okay, so if the robot made it to this gray box, then make this sign pop up. I just didn't show you guys in that code. I just didn't show you guys the code for that in that portion of the lesson, because that's not really what we were talking about, but that's like the code that like behind how like that works. It's pretty much just saying if this like triangle or like robot makes it into the square, then uh then on click or on hover, then show this message to pop up. So that's the you win message popping up. So that's pretty much also just the if statements, right? So wait, let me go back to that actually. Oh, I just X'd out of that. Wait. Okay, so the you win message popped up, right? And that was because it like went to this gray square, right? So if any of these like code, if I like messed with this right now, so like for example, instead of rotating right, like if I made this number, for example, if I made this 8200 48 instead of 8247, like this number, now it's not going to be going through this, right? So now it's going to give you lose. So let's test that real quick. So now when we do play, look at that. So instead of rotating right, it just skipped over this else if statement, because now this number isn't equal to this number, right? So now it just goes to this else statement, and now it's rotating left, which is what it did right here. And then it can't go forward, right? So now it's just saying you lose because of that. Does that clear up your question? Okay, I'm glad that made sense. So moving on, back to for loops, right? Wait, did I share the slideshow in the chat, or did I not yet? No, you are not supposed to type this code right now. I'm just showing you guys like how the code works behind like the examples. So yeah, this would be a lot to code in like 2 minutes. Wait, I don't think I shared for loop slideshow, right? Could you guys let me know in the chat? Okay, let me do that right now then. All right, so now the next topic that we're going to be going over is for loops. So a for loop is pretty much a control structure that allows for repetition or the iteration of a specific sequence. And not even best used, but you only pretty much use for loops when you know how many times you want the loop to like occur. So wait, should I wait for a few minutes so that you guys can also all get onto the slideshow? Because I see that not everyone's like looking at it. Okay, wait. Yeah, there's more people on it now. Let's continue. So pretty much you only use for loops when you know how many times you want the loop to occur, right? So here's an example. Imagine you're given the task to write out direction to someone to pick up 100 construction cones. That seems like a simple solution, right? But I mean, that seems like a simple task to give to someone, right? So now you could tell them, pick up one cone, and then pick up another cone, and then pick up one cone, and then pick up another cone. And you could say this like 100 times. You could tell them this like so many times. Like you could tell them this 100 times until they pick up every single cone, which is 100 cones total, right? Or you could just say, pick up one cone and then repeat that 100 times. That's a for loop. So it's saying for 100 times, it's going to go through this loop and it's going to loop this like every single time until it reaches 100 cones. That's pretty much what a for loop is. And back to like how we want to like make things more efficient, and that's like the point of coding and like computer science in general. It's just to make things more efficient and more simpler, right? So that's like the whole point of a for loop. We don't want to keep telling them like, okay, pick up another cone and then pick up one more. That seems so boring and just really inefficient. So instead we could just say, okay, repeat this 100 times of picking up one cone, pretty much, right? So yeah, that's an example, and I feel like that really explains what a for loop is, the core. That's pretty much it, essentially. And then on to this for loop, we can add so many different things. So instead of picking up one cone, we could add code for like doing some other kind of task or fulfilling some other kind of role instead. So this is how a for loop actually looks, right? So earlier we just talked about it in conceptual terms. So now how it actually looks when you're coding it. So first, we want to initialize a counting variable. This can start at any number, but it's usually just 0. And then we want to create a pass or fail condition for the counting variable. So we're saying if 0 is, or well, not 0, but like we're talking about the letter, or I mean variable I. So if I is smaller than or less than 10, then go through this sequence or the code in the for loop, and then add 1 to the variable I. So now let's go through this one more time, but in the terms of like in number terms, right? So we're saying I is going to equal 0. So now is I or 0 less than 10? It is. So now we're going to go through the code, which would be in this for loop statement, or not statement, just in this for loop. And then let's add 1 to 0, because when we're doing plus plus, that pretty much just means adding 1. And I know this says plus plus, but even if this was like plus equals like 1, this would also be the same. But plus plus is the correct like terms to like display that. So we're saying go through this and then do 0 plus 1, so that's going to be 1. And now we're going to go through this again. Now we're not going to go through the this part, like this red part right here, where we're instantiating the letter I to 0, because we already made that variable. Now we're just going to go to this after we add 1 to 0. Now we're going to go to this green part again, where it's saying, okay, so now is 1 less than 10? It is. So now we're going to go through this code again, and now we're going to go back to this blue part where it's saying, let's add 1 more to the number 1. So now the number is going to equal 2. And now when we go back to this pass or fail condition part of the for loop, we're saying, is 2 less than 10? It is. So now we're going to go through this code again, and now we're going to add 1 to 2. So now it's going to be 3. And now we're going to go through this all the way till 10. So if you noticed, we're starting at the number 0. So we're not starting at 1, because if we started at 1, this for loop would stop at 9. It wouldn't go through 10 times. So because 9 is less than 10, and then when we add 1 more to 9, it's going to be 10, and 10 is not less than 10, right? So now we're not going to go through this code, and we're going to come out of this for loop. But if we start at 0, we can get to like the point where we can add 10, we can go through this 10 times, because 0 is technically like, you can think of it as 1 right here, right? So at 0, we're going through this code once, and then we're going through this until we go to 9. So we're still going to be stopping here when it's 9, but we also went through this at 0 once, right? So technically we did go through this for loop go through this for loop 10 times instead of just 9 times, which would have been the amount of times that we would have went through this if the for loop started at 1 instead of 0. So yeah, and here is just more here's like an example in like more technical terms, I guess. So pretty much we're just initializing a counting variable, we're creating a pass or fail condition for the counting variable, and then we're updating the counting variable every time we go through the for loop. So in the example of the construction cones, so over here, let me just like edit this as we go right now. So for the construction cones example, we're going through it 100 times, right? So we want to put 100 right here. And now we're going to be going through this 100 times. So that's the only change that we had to make for this like for loop to go through 100 times. And we want them to pick up 1 cone, right? So that's the code that would go in here. So yeah, that's pretty much like the for loop that we would have made to like go through this like picking up a construction cone like 100 times. Does anyone have any questions on that? So that's essentially what for loops are. But now let's talk about it a little bit more. So each component of the for loop is separated by a semicolon, right? So here they are right here. And all 3 components are encompassed in the parentheses, which is like the green highlighted parts that I'm showing right now. And then the sequence to repeat is it's gonna be like the code that's gonna be followed immediately when this like for loop is true. So whenever the variable I is less than 10, this code is going to be taking place or occurring. And all of this has to be enclosed in curly braces, just like we do with our functions. We have to do curly braces for loops, and also the if statements that we talked about earlier, the if else statements and the else if statements, all that we have to have encompassed in curly braces. So yeah, any questions on like the coding aspect of this, but like not even how this works, but also just like any questions on like how you would like write this, like how you code like if else statements or for loops, anything of that sort? All right, so now let's go through this for loop and like what would actually be the result of this, right? So we want to print hello 2 times. So let's see if this for loop can actually do that. Well, over here we can see the output that yeah, you can. So someone just asked if we can have like an if else statement inside a for loop, and we can do that. So there could be a for loop. So going back to the construction cones example. So if we're doing a for loop of like picking up the construction cones, we could do so if let's say if the construction cone is if the construction cone size is bigger than or like longer than like if the construction cone is taller than 3 feet, then we want to leave the construction cone. And else, we do want to pick it up. So here, pretty much what we're saying is, so there's 100 construction cones that we want to pick up. So we're gonna go to each single construction cone and we're gonna see if this construction cone size is greater than or like if it's taller than 3 feet, we don't want to pick it up and we want to leave that construction cone. But otherwise, if this construction cone is if it's not greater than 3 feet, then let's just pick it up. So that's pretty much what we're doing here. So yeah, we can have if else statements, we can have else if statements, we can have for loops inside of a for loop. So yeah, we can do all sorts of things with that. But yeah. So going back to this example from earlier, I hope I answered the question to the person that asked in the chat, by the way. If you have any like more questions or like want more details on that, let me know. But we'll be moving on with this example for like how this would like take place if we want hello to show up 2 times, right? So first, we're instantiating a variable I to the number 0. So now we're going to check, is 0 less than 2? Since it is less than 2, let's go through this for loop and print hello. So now we just printed hello. Oops. So now we just printed hello once, right? So that's what we just did. We printed hello once. And now let's go through this again. So after we printed hello once, since that means that we went through this for loop one time already. So now we want to add 1 to the number 0. So now the number 0 is actually going to be 1. So now is 1 less than 2? Yes, it is. So now we're going to print hello one more time. So now this is our second time printing hello. So now we printed hello twice. So now since we like went through this for loop another time, we want to add one more number. We want to add 1 to number 1, right? So now 1 plus 1 is going to be 2. Is 2 less than 2? It's not, right? So now instead of printing hello, we're just going to get out of this for loop, and that's going to be the end. That pretty much means that we just like exited the for loop, right? And here I have like the instructions that like pretty much that we just went through. We have like all those like steps that if you guys want to go through it again, you guys can always do that. But yeah, so now we got the output to be hello printed twice. So if you want to ever see how many times the for loop is going like occurring, you can literally just like look at the number here. If it's a 0 right here and if it's a 2 right here, we know it's going to be occurring 2 times. If it's a 0 right here and if it's like 20 right here, that means that this hello is going to be printed 20 times. But yeah. So you don't necessarily have to like go through the for loop like every single like iteration. Instead, you can just like look at the number here and you know that that's going to be the amount of iterations that are going to be like happening if the number is 0. And by number I mean like number that we're initializing I to begin with. Because if this was 1 instead of 0, then this would only be outputting hello one time, right? So this has to be 0 if we're only looking at the number here to see how many iterations we're going through. Does anyone have any questions on that? All right, so with for loops, we can also have an infinite loop, and we have to be really careful of this because infinite loop pretty much just means that the code in the for loop is never going to happen. And it's just going to keep going through the iterations, but it's never actually going to do any code. It's just going to keep going, and it's going to make the program crash, and our website's not going to pull up, or like it's not going to show up, right? So here, if we look at this code, we can understand why it's an infinite loop. So we're instantiating the variable I to 0, and then we're seeing, is 0 less than 2? Yes, it is. So now we're going to print does not compute. So don't, like, it kind of ignore like what it's saying, like does not compute. Actually, let me just edit this. Let's just do hi, right? So now it's just going to print hi one time, and now it's saying, since we did go through the for loop, now we're going to subtract 0 by 1. So earlier we did plus plus, I plus plus, and now when we do I minus minus, that pretty much just takes away 1 from our existing number. So right now we're at 0, and it's saying subtract 0 by the number 1. So now we're going to have negative 1, right? Is negative 1 less than 2? It is. So now we're going to print hi again. Now we're going to do negative 1 minus 1 again. So now it's going to be negative 2. Negative 2 is smaller than than the number 2. So now we're going to print hi again. So if you guys see, the pattern with this is that it's never going to ever like actually be greater than 2. So we're just going to be going through this like print hi like statement a million times. It's just going to keep going and keep going. And the computer never actually comes to a conclusion, which is why this will like crash our program since it's repeating forever, and the loop can never actually exit the statements, right? So yeah, so here pretty much what it's saying is, will the value of I ever fail the condition? No, it's never actually going to fail the condition of like being greater than 2 or being less than 2, so that it could like, if it was greater than 2, we could actually get out of this for loop. It's never going to fulfill that because it's always going to be less than 2. It's actually going to be in the negatives. It's not even going to get to the positives because we're starting at 2 and then we're subtracting from there. So it's always going to be in the negatives, which means it's never going to be greater than 2, and thus it's never actually gonna like get out of the for loop. And so like when we do this, like if you ever actually like accidentally create like an infinite loop and you like open up your like web page or your website that you're trying to see, like none of this like is actually gonna pop up. It's just gonna show like a little message right here that says like web page not able to like load properly or something like that, like something of that sort, because this loop is just going on forever, that the computer can't come to a conclusion that like it can't show like the final web page or whatever, you know? So that's like the pretty much the conclusion of what infinite loops and for loops are in general. So if you guys have any questions on that, let me know in the chat real quick. And here we have another example of a for loop. So I'm not actually gonna go through this since we already went through like a bunch of for loop examples throughout this slideshow and this explanation. So yeah. And I was actually gonna go over while loops today too, but instead I think I'll just go over like a coding example of for loops, and then we'll get started with our final project because we could go over while loops in our next lesson in like next week, Saturday. So now let's just look at the code that we went through for loops, right? So we're saying, so pretty much for the for loops example of the robot, we want this robot to get to this gray square right here, right? So if you count this, it's going to be 20 boxes right here. So we want this to go forward 20 times. So a really inefficient way of doing this would literally just be like copy and pasting, like move forward, move forward, move forward, move forward 20 times. You could do it that way, but that would be really inefficient, like our construction cones example, right? Instead, we could do a for loop that says, okay, move forward and then repeat this 20 times. So that's pretty much what this first for loop is doing. And then we want to rotate left 1 time. And then if you count these squares right here, these are going to be 19. So now we want to move 19 times forward and then rotate left once again and then move 19 squares forward again, rotate left and then move 17 squares forward to get to the final gray square box that we want to get to. So now if we go through this, you guys will notice that we finally do get to the gray box because we have the for loops that like go through each one of these iterations, I mean, yeah. So yeah, so we get the message you win pop up when we finally do get to the gray box. But now let's see what would be an example if we didn't get to there. So for example, if we only moved forward, let's say 5 times, and then we rotated left. Let's see what the result would be then. So now we moved forward 5 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we rotated left because that's the next piece of code right after we get out of this for loop. So when we rotate left, there's nowhere else to go because the next for loop is going forward, right? So now we can't actually go forward here. So that's why it returns a you lose, like image pop up, make like a you lose image or text pop up, right? So yeah, so now if we change this back to 20, this should be working. So if we just refresh, and this should get to like the gray box once again because we just returned it to like the former code. But yeah, so that's the example for the for loop robot instruction. Robot maze. So yeah, so now that it did get to the gray box, it returns a UN message. And yeah, so that's gonna be the end of notes for today. So now let's continue with our final projects. So today let's first create our like file for our final project. So I think in our last meeting we made a folder for this course. So now let's make an actual file in this folder. So first we just want to right click and then click new file. And then here let's type final project.html and then click enter. And this part I do want you guys to do. So if you guys could all get to VS Code that you guys should have downloaded by now, and then open up the final project.html, and we can go over this one more time if anyone would like to. So yeah, let me know if once everyone is over here in this step. And once everyone is here, you guys can get started with trying to like personalize this code and like this website. If you just do shift 1 and then enter, you guys should get the template. So then you guys could get started with some of the things that we learned from the last few sessions. Like you guys could make the body in the style tags. You guys could make the script tags and also start with the header in the body tags like we did in our last meeting. So yeah. I think if it's not popping up when you do shift 1 enter, it's probably just because like you're doing it like one thing after another. You should do shift 1 and then click enter. Like, I don't know if that made sense though, like that explanation. So if it's not like popping up for you, here's the code in the chat for anyone that's not working for. Okay, I think that worked for some people. It works now, but if you guys just want to have the code that I just have right here, you guys have that in the chat. You guys have that available in the chat. So yeah. So now if you type into your Finder or your like hard drive or hard disk the name of the file that you just made. So I named mine final project.html. It should pop up, and when you double click on that, let's have that side by side so that we can like look at the changes happening to our code to our webpage, as we code. So is everyone here at this step? Just type in yes or no in the chat, please. All right, so I'll give everyone like a few more minutes until we get here, because I know a few people are still working on it. And if you guys are here though, you guys can get started with like, like creating the header of this and like choosing a background color and all that. Because we did go over that before, so just remember that you do the style tags in between the just remember that you do the style tags in between the header and script, and that the script is also in the header tags, and then we have the body tags for like actually showing up like headers and all that kind of stuff on our webpage. So our final project, once again, if anyone wasn't here for the last meeting, so for our final project, we're doing a restaurant kind of like themed webpage. So we want to like be able to choose an appetizer, a main course, and a beverage, and then we want to type in like the name and like all that of the user, and then we want to click submit order, and then we want like the total price to come up, and like just like different like things to like pop up according to what we selected. So that's gonna be our final project, and I'll be going into like more of like the functionality of this and everything in our next few sessions as we go along. And the last few sessions are just going to be more like work time, and I'll just be there to help you guys along with it. And we can always extend the work time too if you guys need more time to work on this. So like don't stress that like you might not be able to complete this in the time allotted. So yeah, but now let's just create like a header for this. So if you guys remember, we have the header and the body tags. So if we just type h1 and then we do a greater than symbol, we end the tags. And now so I made mine a street food hut theme. So now I'm gonna make mine like something different. I'll say like cafe or something. And now when I do save and go back to my document, you guys can see that the text that I just typed in as a header just popped up. And right after this, remember that when we do H5 or anything greater than 1, like as the numbers get greater, the text is going to be getting smaller. So I want a smaller text now, right? So that's why I'm going to be doing a bigger header tag. So I'm going to do H5. And now let's type in, please pick a food item and order. And now when I do Control Save, you can see that like the text is way smaller because I did an H5 tag. So the header tag is smaller, and you can see both the text on my webpage. Does anyone have any questions so far? So if you guys have any questions along the way, because we did go over this in our first meeting, so if you guys, that was like 2 weeks ago. So if you guys need a refresher on anything, just let me know in the chat. We might not be able to go into detail as we did in the meetings, but like I could just like kind of overview some stuff. So yeah, now that we're done with the just like naming stuff, now let's give it a background color because it looks pretty boring right now. So let's give this I'm thinking a purple color, but to do that we need to first create some style tags, right? So now when we look back at our div ID example from our last session, you can see that we made our style tags in the you can see that we made our style tags between the header and script tags that I just mentioned earlier. So now we want to go back into our final project and replicate that. So right after the meta tags and the title tags, you just want to click enter and then create a style tag. And then finish that style tag off and then click enter. And now we can just like assign a display color by doing body color curly braces and then a background color. Click tab, and then over here I said purple, so I'm going to just choose blue violet. And you guys can always edit this color too, like this, by clicking on the color picker. So I want like more of a pastel purple, so that's what I'm going to choose. And then I also want to change the font of this text that I have right now, the Rushita's Cafe, and please pick a food item and order. I want to make it a little bit more pleasing to the eye, so I'm going to type in font family. And I want to choose Franklin Goth Medium, Arial Narrow. And when I do that, I can see that my font is going to be changing now, and as well as the background color. When I click refresh, you can see that the text changed a little bit compared to before. But actually, I don't really like this text, so I'm going to change this again. So let me just select a new one. All right, now let me click save and refresh. That looks the same as before. How about Georgia? All right, I like this one a little bit better, so I'm going to stick with this. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to just personalize your website and like kind of explore what you can do with CSS, even though we're just kind of looking at background color and font family right now. And then I'm just going to go ahead and create my script tags. Even though we're not really going to be coding right now in the script tags, we're not going to be working on any functionality right now. We just want our website to look something like this. So to do that, we also need to align our text, right? So I want this text to pop up right in the middle here. So when I type in text align and then click center and then do save and refresh, you can see that the format of my webpage changes a bit with the text in the middle, and that's because of line 11 right here. we changed the text alignment to the center, so that's why this change just occurred. And then now I want to create a drop-down menu, and I want to create a text box for the name, a mobile number, text box, a text box for the tip, a button called submit order, and a text box to check a checkbox for whether I want text alerts about my order or not. So I want to do all that in my body tag real quick. And that's what I want you guys to work on throughout this week, since we are about to end class in 5 minutes. This is kind of what I want you guys to work on throughout this week. And if not, that's totally fine too, because we'll be continuing working on this next week. We'll just be kind of having some time to get our webpage looking like this. And once everyone is here at this step, we can move forward with actually getting our like submit order button working so that we can have like things pop up. So does anyone have any questions on that? Anything that we should go over? All right, so let me just show you guys how to do the text box, like for the appetizer, for example, and things like that. And also, if you want to create a lot of if tags for the different foods. Okay, yeah. So earlier today we learned about like if statements and like while loops, for loops, all that. So over here, when we're choosing this, we're pretty much doing an if statement. So if we choose sweet and sour pani puri, for example, there's gonna be an if statement saying, so if this item is selected, take this price and add it to the total price. And then if this purchase is like selected, take the $14 and then add it to the $5 or like the total price. Or so, just like those are all like the if statements that we'll be working on in the script tags as we go on with the project. So yeah, that's how we'll be implementing the stuff that we learned today into our websites. And then I'll also be showing you guys how to do like a few of the appetizer or like text box and all that. So one sec, let me pull that up.
Rushita, are you done? If
I'm just trying to look for my notes to explain it a little bit better because I don't think I found the part where I am actually explaining that. So just give me 1 minute, guys.
yeah.
All right, so first let's go over how we create a the options, like a menu bar like this. So we want to first, in the body tag, let's work on making an appetizer one right now. So first type in appetizer, and then when you click save and wrong one, refresh, you should be seeing this appetizer right here. And now with this appetizer, we want to make a, I guess you'd call it like an options like menu bar kind of, right? Or a drop down menu, I mean. So to create a drop down menu, click enter next, and then do select. And we always want to make an ID, but we can skip that part for now because we're just working on getting the menu bar to pop up, right? So now that we did select, actually, yeah, let's just go ahead with IDs to make it easier for next session. And now let's give this an appetizer ID. Now this could be anything. I'm just typing an appetizer ID because that seems fitting to the situation right now. So just type in appetizer ID. And then in the last session, we talked about event handlers and like on click, on hover. So right now on change, we want to do a on change, and we wanted to do, actually, since we didn't make a function for this, let's ignore this right now. Let's just give it an ID and then click enter to finish the drop down menu. And when you click refresh, you should be able to see that like there's a drop down menu that we just didn't add anything into it yet. So to add options into the drop down menu, we want to do a less than sign again, and then type in option. Close that, and then over here we can type in what we want the option to be called. So if I want to type in like toast, for example, and then I click save and refresh, you can see that that's one of like the options. And now if we do another option, let's do coffee, or wait, actually I want to do tea, and you click save and refresh, you can see that now we have two options. So you guys can go like on with this and like create some for appetizers, for desserts, for beverages, or for like main courses, all that. But just like know that like that's what we're doing right here. Like pretty much when we do options, we're adding more options to the select ID, because pretty much what select is, that's a drop down menu. So that's what we're doing by doing select. And when we do ID, we want to be able to access like what we're like clicking, right? So when the user clicks, for example, wedge samosa, this has an ID. This appetizer has an ID of appetizer ID. So we can access what option they clicked over here by accessing this appetizer ID, so that we know how many dollars we have to add to the final price, so that when they click submit order, they can get like a correct total price. So that's like the purpose of having an ID. Just know that you always should have an ID whenever you're creating like a drop-down menu or buttons or like a text view, anything of that sort. So after a drop-down menu, we also want to have text views and buttons. So we did go over this before, but let me just like go over this real quick again. So to add a text view, for example, or not text view, text box. So right after select, click enter, and then do the less than symbol again, and then type in input, type, and do an equal sign. And since we're doing a text box and not a button, we want to type in text. And now we can give this an ID of, it could be anything. So let's just type in example right now. And then after we have the ID, we need a placeholder. So placeholder is pretty much just what we want the text box to like show. So over here it says enter a percentage between 0 and 100, right? So that's the placeholder there. So over here, let's just say hi for an example. You guys can change this according to what you guys want your webpage to look like later on. And now we just want to end this tag so that we can have a text box show up. Oops. So now when we click refresh, we can see that there's a text box that comes up. And that's like what we wanted, right? So that's the text box that we want for the percentage of the tip amount, and also the name and the mobile number. So if you guys want, you guys could take a screenshot of this, or I'm also gonna definitely gonna be posting this in the WhatsApp group so you guys know that how you guys should be like working on this throughout the week and what like the end goal of like how you want the webpage to look. And then if you guys want like the button to pop up, it's gonna be the same way as a text box. So we want to type in input type equals, and then now instead of text, we want buttons, right? So just type in that. And now when we do ID, let's make this example 2, and then placeholder button 1. And now we want to end this tag and click save or control save. And now when we refresh, you can see that there's a button right here. Except I forgot, my bad. It shouldn't be placeholder. This should be value. It's actually different for buttons. It's different for buttons. So instead of doing placeholder, we want to do value. And here we want to type in button 1. And now when we click save and refresh, you guys should be able to see what you just named the button. And I'll be providing this in this code in the chat. So make sure to copy and paste that into wherever you're like saving this or whatever file you named yours, so that you can look over this throughout the week and add more text boxes, buttons, or drop-down menus according to how you want your like restaurant like webpage to look like. So yeah, and that's pretty much what was everything that I wanted to go over today. So thank you all for coming and attending today. Definitely come for next week's session 2, because we're going to be going over how we actually get like all the values to add up together and like get like the final customer's name, customer's phone number, and how we retrieve all that data.
Rushita, next week is Thanksgiving, kada. So I think not much attendance will be there. So shall we move next week's class to the following week after Thanksgiving?
Oh yeah, sure. I didn't realize. I kind of forgot it was Thanksgiving break. Yeah, we'll do this next week then, next Saturday. So try to work on this between now and then.
Yeah. Awesome, Amma. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend. Have a good Thanksgiving break.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great Thanksgiving break. Let me know if you guys have any questions in the WhatsApp group.
Yeah, I'll send out the recording. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm not in the WhatsApp group.
I think
What's your name?
Shasta.
Either your one of your parents should be there in the WhatsApp group. That is where we are sharing info. So just ask your dad or mom if they are present in the WhatsApp group, or else you can send me your number and I'll add you there.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for hosting, Uncle.
No problem. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.